This is a very important day where we're looking at CSS's overview, syntax, and box model. With the web having these three distinct layers, the interaction, the presentation, and the content, CSS is what adds that presentation, the layout, color, and size to our HTML. It allows us to create aesthetically pleasing layouts to help package together our products in a more meaningful, lower barrier. CSS takes something like an image and applies certain things like width, height, maybe rounded corners, maybe like a border, maybe a drop shadow. What I'm getting at here is we can use CSS to apply certain presentation-based factors so that we can add value to what we're creating or emphasis to what we're creating. Basically leveraging all of those quote-unquote invisible design things that we've talked about these last few days, but put code behind it. When we look at how to actually write CSS, we have to talk about the syntax. CSS is an interesting language in that we'll have a selector, a left curly bracket, and a right curly bracket. This is an open and a close. This is a common thing with all programming, where we begin something and we need to end it. We then need to tab in or indent to show that all of our properties, we're going to have a property, a colon, and then value, and a semicolon. So we'll have an indentation, a property, colon, value, semicolon. And if we have more than one property and value, which is pretty common, we add them. But they're all indented once inside of the selector. So an example of this, if we run with the image, and we need to make the image have rounded corners, and it needs to be 300 by 300, we would write it like this, img. So this is an element selector, curly brackets. First I'd start with border radius, colon. I'd maybe use 4px, which stands for pixels, and then a semicolon. That's an open and a close for a property and value. Next thing I would write is width and height. Again, I came up with an idea, and the implementation for this idea is adding properties, values, inside of a selector. And we wrap the values in a colon and a semicolon. You'll notice that the numbers have units attached to them. The vast majority of the time, you're going to have one of many interesting things about what I've written here is that this will affect all images where this CSS rule is applied. So any HTML file that is linked to this CSS will apply this to every image on the page. So every image will be 300 pixels by 300 pixels with a border radius of 4 pixels. It is one of the best things about CSS, especially when you use this cascade or you use specificity, or in this case, non-specific CSS selecting to your advantage. One way we get around this is using a different type of selector where if, let's say I have some HTML that looks like this, img, it has an href equals inside of there, but it also has a class attribute, thumbnail, and it would have an alt tag. What the class attribute allows us to do is to write a CSS selector with the syntax of dot and then the corresponding class here. So it'll be dot thumbnail, curly brackets, and then we would paste all of our props and values in here. This way, the only images that would get these properties and values changed are ones with this class. So if we're looking through the HTML file, it's very obvious it's non-ambiguous which elements are being styled. This is a very important consistent way to write HTML to tie it into the way we're writing our CSS. It helps other people who have to deal with our code, whether it's us in the future or other people on a team we may be on, to understand what we were trying to do. Rather than using an image selector like this, we probably don't know how all images are going to look on our website. Instead, coming up with consistent naming rules for classes, which will be a best practice for us to follow in order to make consistent choices moving forward. It helps with modularity, so reusing the code that we create on other things in the future. It cuts down on ambiguous choices, on things that you read and you're like, whoa, why did somebody write it this way? The box model is the other really big fundamental that I want to look at today. That is when we are drawing out to understand our designs, if we have three images that are next to each other, the box model is something that allows us to understand how can we get spacing between the images, how can we add spacing between the images and their borders, how in general do we get them next to one another, so in line. Not going to get into the details of the code behind this in this video. I just want to start the conversation and awareness around the box model is how we truly understand the ways in which CSS works with width and height and spacing between things, and how we can leverage layout in a more effective way. Keep in mind, these are just to become aware of these concepts. It's not to own and understand them through and through. A lot of this understanding is up to you. Being able to effectively Google these things or any other search engine, being able to search for this information and find resources that really click with you.